The sun was barely peeking over the cobblestone streets of Savannah, Georgia, when Sweet Haven Bakery came to life. Tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the little storefront glowed like a warm hug against the chill of dawn. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of buttery biscuits, cinnamon rolls fresh from the oven, and coffee so strong it could wake a hibernating bear. The walls were painted a soft peach, held chalkboards scribbled with daily specials, pecan pie today, peach cobbler tomorrow, and framed photos of smiling locals who'd made Sweet Haven their second home. A bell above the door jingled with every customer, a cheerful chime that seemed to say, "Y'all come back now." By 6:30 a.m., the place was already humming. Moms grabbing muffins for school lunches, retirees swapping gossip over glazed donuts, and tourists fumbling with maps while eyeing the cupcake display. Behind the counter, Lila Bennett was in her element. At 32, she had the kind of smile that made strangers feel like friends. Her hazel eyes crinkled at the corners as if she were always on the verge of a laugh. Her blonde hair was swept into a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and her green apron was dusted with flour from an early batch of scones. Lila had been at Sweet Haven for 5 years, long enough to know every regular by name and order. She'd slip an extra cookie to kids with shy grins, charm cranky businessmen into tipping, and somehow keep the line moving even when the espresso machine threw a tantrum. To the folks of Savannah, she wasn't just a baker. She was the heart of the place, the one who made you feel like you belonged. However, Lila's life wasn't all sunshine and roses. She worked double shifts to help pay for her mom's medical bills, her sneakers pounding the hardwood floor while her dreams of opening her bakery gathered dust in a notebook under her bed. Still, she never let it show. Not when the rent was late, not when her feet ached, not when a customer snapped because their latte wasn't foamy enough. Lila had a gift for turning bad days into bearable ones, and Sweet Haven was her stage. That gift was about to be tested, because at 7:30 sharp, the bell jingled with a different kind of energy. The chatter in the bakery dipped like the room itself was holding its breath. In shuffled Clarence Tate, 82 years old and as welcoming as a thunderstorm. His wiry frame was hunched under a faded plaid shirt, his lopsided baseball cap casting a shadow over eyes that could spot a flaw from across the room. His boots scuffed the floor as he made a beeline for his usual spot, a stool at the far end of the counter, where he could glare at the world uninterrupted. The other staff called him Mr. Grumble behind his back, and for good reason. Clarence didn't just complain. He made it an art form. Too sweet, too dry, too slow. If there was a problem, he'd find it, and he'd let you know in a voice like gravel under tires. The younger bakers, kids barely out of high school, would scatter when they saw him coming. "Not today," they'd mutter, diving for the dishwasher or pretending to check inventory. Even Sarah, the manager, would find an excuse to vanish. Nobody wanted to deal with Clarence's rants about lumpy oatmeal cookies or coffee that tasted like regret. Nobody, that is, except Lila. She'd served him on her first week, 5 years ago, when he'd barked that her biscuits were harder than a tax audit. Most newbies would have crumbled, but Lila just laughed, not mockingly, but like she was in on the joke. "Let me get you a fresh one, Mr. Tate," she'd said, sliding a steaming biscuit onto his plate before he could argue. He'd squinted at her, suspicious, but ate every bite without another word. From then on, Clarence was hers to handle, whether she liked it or not. He'd grumble if anyone else brought his order, snapping, "Where's the blonde girl?" until Lila appeared, her smile unshaken. This morning was no different. "Morning, Mr. Tate," she called, already pouring his black coffee. No cream, no sugar, served in the chipped mug he claimed felt right. He grunted, settling onto his stool with a creak of joints and a rustle of newspaper. In his hands was a small leather notebook, its pages yellowed and curling, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in an antique shop. He opened it, scribbling something with a stubby pencil, his lips moving like he was arguing with himself. Lila never asked what he wrote. She figured it was his business, not hers. But today, something was off. As she set his coffee down, Clarence didn't look up. Not to complain, not to nod, nothing. He just kept writing, his hand trembling more than usual. Lila hesitated, her instincts tingling. "Biscuit and jam coming right up," she said, softer this time, watching him. He muttered something she couldn't catch, his pen scratching harder. When she returned to clear his plate, he was gone. The coffee was half drunk, the biscuit untouched, a first in 5 years. On the counter, his notebook lay forgotten, its cover cracked open like an invitation. Lila's heart skipped. She glanced around. No Clarence, no one watching. Against her better judgment, she nudged the book shut, and a scrap of paper slipped free, fluttering to the floor. She bent to pick it up, her breath catching at the words scrawled in Clarence's shaky hand. "This girl's worth more than gold." Lila froze, the paper trembling in her fingers. What did it mean? Why would a man who barely said thanks write something like that? And why leave it behind? As the bell jingled with new customers, she slipped the note into her apron, her mind racing. Clarence Tate wasn't just a grumpy old man. He was hiding something, and Lila had just stumbled onto the edge of it. Lila Bennett had learned to read the rhythm of Sweet Haven Bakery like a seasoned sailor reads the sea. By 7:25 a.m., the breakfast rush was in full swing. Moms herding kids, retirees swapping stories, and delivery guys grabbing coffee before the Savannah heat kicked in. The bell above the door jingled nonstop, the air thick with the scent of buttery biscuits and cinnamon sugar. Lila moved like a dancer behind the counter, her green apron dusted with flour, her smile a steady beacon no matter how chaotic it got. She'd pour coffee, bag donuts, and toss out, "Y'all come back," with the ease of someone born to it. But every morning at exactly 7:30, the rhythm shifted. The bell would ring with a heavier chime, and in would shuffle Clarence Tate, his presence like a storm cloud rolling over a picnic. At 82, Clarence was a fixture at Sweet Haven, as much a part of the place as the chalkboard menus or the creaky wooden stools. But unlike the warm peach walls or the bubbling coffee urns, he brought no comfort. His wiry frame seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 grudges, his faded plaid shirt and lopsided baseball cap as unchanging as his scowl. His eyes, sharp despite his age, could spot a crumb on a plate from 10 feet away, and his voice, gravelly, like he'd gargled sand, could silence a room. To the staff, he was Mr. Grumble, a nickname whispered with a mix of fear and frustration. The younger bakers, barely old enough to vote, would scatter when they saw him, diving for the dishwasher or pretending to mop the already clean floor. Even Sarah, the manager, would mutter, "Not today," and vanish into the office. Nobody wanted to tangle with Clarence's complaints, which came as reliably as the sunrise. He'd claim his stool at the far end of the counter, where he could glare at the world through the window, and unfold his newspaper with a snap that said, "I'm already disappointed." Then the demands would start. His coffee had to be black, with no sugar, served scalding hot in the chipped mug he'd claimed as his own. If it was even a degree too cool, he'd slide it back with a grunt. "You trying to serve me dishwater?" His biscuits had to be fresh from the oven, golden but not too crisp, with a pat of butter melted just so. A single soggy bite could spark a lecture about standards going to hell. And don't get him started on the jam. Strawberry only, never raspberry, and God forbid it came from a packet instead of a jar. Lila, though, didn't flinch. She'd been serving Clarence since her first week at Sweet Haven 5 years ago, and she'd learned to navigate his moods like a ship steering through rocks. "Morning, Mr. Tate," she'd call, already pouring his coffee before he could settle his creaky bones onto the stool. She'd slide his biscuit across the counter, butter glistening, jam in a tiny glass bowl, and wait for the inevitable critique. Most days, he'd squint at the plate, poke the biscuit like it was evidence in a crime scene, and mutter something about better than yesterday, barely. For Clarence, that was high praise. It wasn't that Lila enjoyed the challenge. She had plenty on her plate. Double shifts to cover her mom's hospital bills, a leaky apartment roof, and dreams of her own bakery that felt further away with every paycheck. There were mornings when her feet ached before she even clocked in, when the weight of smiling through it all pressed against her chest like a stone. But Lila had a rule. Everybody deserved a fair shot, even the ones who made it hard. And Clarence? He made it really hard. Take the morning of the Great Biscuit debacle, about 2 years into her time at Sweet Haven. It was a Saturday, the kind of day when the line snaked out the door and the kitchen was a symphony of clanging pans. Lila was juggling a dozen orders when Clarence barked for his usual biscuit, butter, jam. In the chaos, a new kid in the back had let the biscuit sit too long, and Lila, distracted, didn't notice the slightly charred edge until she set it in front of him. Clarence took one look and slammed his fork down, loud enough to make a toddler at the next table jump. "What's this supposed to be?" he growled, his voice carrying over the hum of chatter. "You burning the place down now?" The room went quiet, all eyes on Lila. Sarah peeked out from the kitchen, ready to intervene, but Lila waved her off. Her cheeks burned, not from anger, but from the sting of letting him down. "My fault, Mr. Tate," she said, her voice steady. "Let me get you a fresh one." She darted to the oven, plucked a perfect biscuit, and had it on his plate in under a minute, butter melting like a sunrise, jam glowing red. "Try this instead. Coffee's on me today." Clarence squinted at her, then at the biscuit, and ate it without another word. The bakery exhaled, the chatter picking back up, but Lila felt the weight of his stare linger. Then there was the coffee incident. During a rainy spring that turned Savannah streets into rivers, Clarence came in soaked, his mood darker than the clouds outside. "Coffee hot," he snapped, shaking water from his cap. Lila poured it fresh, steam curling from the mug, but when he took a sip, he shoved it back. "Cold as a frog's belly," he said. Lila checked. It was scalding, hot enough to burn her fingers through the handle, but she didn't argue. She brewed a new pot, served it, and watched him grimace again. "Still wrong," he muttered, demanding a third. The other bakers rolled their eyes, one whispering, "Just spit in it next time." But Lila kept her cool, delivering a fourth mug with a smile that didn't waver. "This one's perfect, I promise." Clarence drank it, his scowl softening just a hair, and left a quarter tip, his version of an olive branch. The worst came during Thanksgiving week, when Sweet Haven was a zoo. Tourists, locals, and college kids home for the holiday packed the tables, the line spilling onto the sidewalk. Clarence, never one for crowds, showed up anyway, his patience thinner than a pie crust. Lila was a blur, bagging rolls, refilling coffee, wiping spills, when he waved her over. "Where's my damn biscuit?" he barked, loud enough to turn heads. "You forgetting me now?" Lila's heart sank. She hadn't forgotten. The kitchen was just slammed. "Coming right up, Mr. Tate," she said, rushing to prioritize his order. She delivered a steaming biscuit buttered to perfection and threw in a slice of pumpkin pie on the house. "For the holiday," she said, hoping to soften him. He ate it all, pie included, but left without a word, his silence sharper than any complaint. Those moments weren't easy. There were days when Lila wanted to snap, to tell him she wasn't his personal chef or his punching bag. After the Thanksgiving fiasco, she'd stood in the alley behind the bakery, hands trembling, wondering why she bothered. But something always stopped her. Maybe it was the way Clarence came back, day after day, like he needed Sweet Haven as much as she did. Maybe it was the flicker in his eyes when she got his order just right, a look that wasn't quite gratitude but wasn't hate either. So she kept going, pouring coffee, baking biscuits, and smiling through the gripes. What set Lila apart wasn't just her patience. It was her heart. When Clarence coughed through a winter flu, she'd slip a spoonful of honey into his coffee, calling it a house special so he wouldn't argue. He drank it with no complaints, a miracle in itself. When his scarf went missing one chilly December, she dug out a spare from the lost and found, draping it over his stool like it'd been there all along. "Don't catch a cold, Mr. Tate," she said, and he kept the scarf, his fingers lingering on the wool. For his birthday, she'd overheard the date from a chatty regular. She baked a single oatmeal cookie, his favorite, and stuck a tiny candle in it. "Make a wish," she teased. He stared at her, his mouth twitching as he might smile, then blew out the candle and ate the cookie in silence, staying an extra hour that day. Her coworkers didn't get it. "You're wasting your time," Sarah said once, scrubbing the muffin tin. "He's never gonna tip you decent, let alone say thanks." Lila just shrugged. Maybe he doesn't need to. Maybe he's just him. But deep down, she wondered, why did Clarence come back? Why did he only let her serve him? And what was in that notebook he clutched like a lifeline, scribbling when he thought no one was looking? She hadn't told anyone about the note she'd found, the one that said, "This girl's worth more than gold." It sat in her apron pocket, folded tight, a puzzle she couldn't solve. She'd almost convinced herself it was a fluke, a stray thought from a strange old man. But then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Friday, the week before Christmas, and Sweet Haven was decked out in tinsel and lights. Clarence arrived late, his face paler than usual, his hands unsteady as he gripped the counter. "Biscuit sandwich," he muttered, "a rare order. Bacon, egg, cheese, no tomato." Lila nodded, but the kitchen was out of bacon, a fact she dreaded admitting. "Mr. Tate, we're fresh out," she said, bracing herself. "Can I make you something else?" His eyes flashed and he leaned forward, voice low but venomous. "You telling me you can't do one damn thing right? Lying to me now?" The accusation stung, sharper than his usual gripes. Before Lila could respond, he stood, knocking his stool back, and stormed out, the bell clanging like a gunshot. Lila stood frozen, her throat tight. She'd seen him mad, but never like this. As she cleaned his spot, something caught her eye, a crumpled paper, fallen from his coat. She unfolded it, her pulse racing. In his shaky scrawl were the words, "She's not like them." Them? Who? And why write about her at all? For 3 days, Clarence didn't come back. Lila checked the clock each morning, her stomach twisting. She asked around, neighbors, regulars, but no one knew where he was. The 2 notes burned in her pocket, their words looping in her mind. Was he sick? Angry? Gone for good? She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd missed something, that those scribbled lines held a truth she wasn't ready for. On the 4th day, her phone rang during a rare quiet moment. An unfamiliar number, a man's voice, calm but urgent. "Miss Bennett, we need to talk about Clarence Tate." Lila's heart stopped. The bakery faded, the world narrowing to that voice. Whoever this was, whatever they wanted, she knew one thing. Nothing would ever be the same. The air in Sweet Haven Bakery felt different that week, like someone had turned down the volume on Savannah's usual hum. It was 5 days since Clarence Tate had stormed out, his words, "You lying to me now?" still ringing in Lila Bennett's ears. The tinsel twinkled, the coffee urn bubbled, and the bell above the door jingled with every customer. But Lila couldn't shake the quiet where Clarence's grumbling should have been. His stool at the counter sat empty, a lonely island in the morning rush. She'd glance at the clock, 7:30 sharp, and wait for his shuffling boots, his gravelly growl about biscuits or coffee, but nothing. Just the chatter of moms grabbing muffins and tourists fumbling with change. By Thursday, the knot in her stomach had grown roots. Lila tried to brush it off. Maybe he'd found a new spot, some hole in the wall with biscuits crispier than hers. Maybe he was still mad about that baconless sandwich. But deep down, she knew better. She'd pulled those 2 scraps of paper from her apron pocket a dozen times since finding them. This girl's worth more than gold, and she's not like them. their shaky scrawls staring back like a riddle she couldn't crack. She'd kept them secret, not even telling Sarah, who'd laughed off Clarence's absence with a flip of her hand. "Good riddance to Mr. Grumble," Sarah had said, wiping down the counter. "Maybe he's haunting a Waffle House now." Lila forced a smile, but her eyes drifted to that empty stool, her mind replaying the times she'd slipped him honey or lit a birthday candle. He wasn't just a customer. Not anymore. He'd become part of her rhythm. And without him, Sweet Haven felt off-key. She asked around. Old Mr. Jenkins at the hardware store, Miss Ruth who sold flowers down the block, but nobody's seen Clarence. "Probably holed up with that temper of his," Miss Ruth said, snipping a rose stem. Lila nodded, but the unease stuck. She'd catch herself staring out the window, half expecting his lopsided cap to bob past, his notebook tucked under his arm. Why did it matter so much? He'd never thanked her, never tipped more than a quarter, never even smiled. Yet those notes, those scribbled words, gnawed at her. What had he meant? And where was he? Friday morning brought no answers. The bakery buzzed with its usual chaos, kids smearing icing on their cheeks, retirees debating the weather. But Lila moved slower, her hands on autopilot as she bagged scones. She'd barely slept, replaying that last fight, wondering if she'd pushed him away for good. The phone call from the day before lingered too, a man's voice, calm but clipped, saying, "Miss Bennett, we need to talk about Clarence Tate." She'd agreed to meet him that afternoon, her stomach flipping like a skillet pancake. Was Clarence in trouble? Sick? Suing the bakery for a bad biscuit? She didn't know, but she'd stuffed those notes in her pocket like a lifeline, their creases worn from her fingers. At 2 p.m., the bell jingled, and in walked a man who didn't belong. He was mid-40s, tall and lean, with a gray suit so crisp it looked like he'd ironed it on the way over. His polished shoes clicked against the hardwood, and his leather briefcase screamed money. More Wall Street than Savannah. The regulars glanced up, curious, but Lila knew he was here for her. "Miss Bennett?" he said, his voice smooth as polished oak. She wiped her hands on her apron, flour smudging the green fabric, and nodded. "That's me. You the one who called?" He offered a small, tight smile. "Edward Hayes, attorney. Can we sit?" He gestured to a corner table, away from the bustle. Lila's pulse kicked up, but she followed, sliding into a chair as he set his briefcase down with a soft thud. Sarah shot her a look. "What's this about?" But Lila waved her off. Hayes opened the case, pulled out a manila envelope, and fixed her with a steady gaze. "I represent the estate of Clarence Tate," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to land. "He passed away last week." The world tilted. Lila gripped the table, her breath catching like she'd been punched. "Passed away? Clarence?" Her mind flashed to his pale face that last morning, his trembling hands, the way he'd stormed out. "No," she whispered more to herself than Hayes. "He was just here. He was fine." But he hadn't been fine, had he? She'd seen it, the exhaustion in his slump, the edge in his voice, and she'd let him walk away mad. Hayes's face softened just a fraction. "It was his heart," he said. "Congestive failure. He went quietly, home. Didn't suffer, if that helps." It didn't. Lila's eyes stung, tears blurring the tinsel across the room. She saw Clarence's scowl, his coffee mug, the way he'd poke at her biscuits like a judge at a fair. He was gone, and she hadn't said goodbye, hadn't told him she cared, in her own quiet way. "Why me?" she managed, her voice cracking. "Why are you telling me this?" Hayes slid the envelope across the table. Her name, Lila Bennett, was written on it in a hand she recognized, shaky but deliberate. "Clarence's." "Because you're in his will," Hayes said, leaning back. "He left you something." Lila stared at the envelope, her heart hammering. "A will?" She'd served him coffee and biscuits for 5 years and smiled through his gripes. But a will? That was for family, for people who mattered. Not a baker in a flour-dusted apron. Her fingers shook as she tore it open, pulling out a typed document and a smaller folded note. The document was official, legal jargon about bequests and assets, but the numbers jumped out like fireworks. $60,000. A house, a small cottage on the edge of Savannah, and a vague line about personal property to be retrieved. "What?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. "This can't be right." "It's right," Hayes said, his tone matter-of-fact. 60,000 in cash, the deed to his cottage, and something he wanted you to find there. He was specific. "Only you get it." He tapped the smaller note. "This came with it." Lila unfolded the paper, her chest tight. Clarence's scrawl filled the page, uneven but clear. "Lila, I ain't good with words, never was. You put up with me for 5 years, more'n anyone should. Most folks see an old grump and walk away, but you didn't. You saw me, even when I didn't deserve it. I got no kin, no one to leave this to. The money's yours. Fix your mama's roof, chase that bakery dream you think I didn't notice. The house, too. There's something in it for you. Find it. You'll know when you see it. Don't thank me. You earned it." Clarence's tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and fast. She pressed the hand to her mouth, the note trembling. He'd noticed her. Every tired smile, every extra cookie, every time she'd bitten back frustration. $60,000 could wipe out her mom's medical debt, kickstart her dream, and change everything. The house, she pictured a little porch, a garden, a place to breathe. But Clarence was gone, and that hurt more than the money felt good. She'd thought he was just a grump, but he'd been watching, quietly tallying her kindness like coins in a jar. Hayes cleared his throat, pulling her back. "There's more you should know," he said, his voice careful. "Clarence wasn't just some old man. He built a shipping business back in the 70s, made a fortune, but lost most of it when his wife and daughter died in a car wreck. Lived alone ever since. Sweet Haven was his lifeline, and you—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "You were the only name in his will." Lila's breath hitched. A businessman? A widower? She saw him now, alone at that counter, scribbling in his notebook, his complaints a shield against a world that'd taken too much. She'd been his anchor, and she hadn't even known. The notes in her pocket made sense now. Worth more than gold? Not like them. Then, the ones who'd walked away. "There's a catch," Hayes said, snapping her out of it. "The house isn't empty." She blinked, wiping her eyes. "What do you mean?" "A woman's staying there, Margaret Dawson. She looked after Clarence when his health failed, cooked for him, and kept him company. He let her live there. No rent, but didn't say why in the will. If you take the house, you'll have to deal with her." Hayes hesitated, his fingers tightening on the briefcase. "She's prickly. Doesn't like change. And he left something in that house for you to find. Didn't tell me what. Said you'd figure it out." Lila's head spun. "A woman named Margaret? A thing to find." She pictured Clarence's note, "You'll know when you see it." And the weight of it sank in. $60,000, a cottage, and now a mystery tied to a stranger. What was it? A photo? A letter? Something worth more than the house itself? And who was Margaret? His nurse? His friend? Something more? Hayes stood, snapping his briefcase shut. "You've got a week to decide. Accept it or walk away. I'll send the papers." He paused at the door, glancing back. "He thought the world of you, Lila. Said you were the best part of his day." The bell jingled as he left, and Lila sat there, the note clutched in her hand. Sarah rushed over, wide-eyed. "What the heck was that? You okay?" Lila couldn't answer. Her mind was a storm. Grief for Clarence, shock at the money, hope for her mom, her dreams. But something else nagged at her. What was in that house? Why her? She stumbled to the alley behind Sweet Haven, needing air. The December chill bit her skin as she leaned against the brick, Clarence's words looping in her head. She pulled out the 2 notes, their ink smudged from her touch, and stared at them. Gold. Not like them. A man who'd lost everything had seen her, and now he'd given her everything he had left. But Margaret, and that mysterious something, loomed like shadows she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed, jolting her. A text from an unknown number. "Don't come to the house. Margaret knows everything." Her breath caught, her pulse racing. Knows everything? About what? The money? The thing Clarence left, his life? Was it a warning, a threat, or a trick? Lila's hands shook as she stared at the screen, the alley silent except for her ragged breathing. Clarence was gone, but he'd pulled her into something bigger than she'd ever imagined. $60,000, a house, a mystery, and now this. Whatever waited in that cottage, whoever Margaret was, Lila knew one thing: she couldn't walk away. Not from him, not from this. The question was, what had Clarence left behind, and what would it cost her to find it? Lila Bennett stood in the alley behind Sweet Haven Bakery, the December wind cutting through her apron as she stared at the text on her phone. "Don't come to the house. Margaret knows everything." Her hands shook, not from the cold but from the weight of it all. Clarence Tate's death, his unbelievable gift, and now this cryptic warning. $60,000, a cottage, a mysterious something to find, and a woman named Margaret who might hold the key, or the lock, to it all. She should have been over the moon. The money could fix her mom's roof, fund her bakery dream, and give her a fresh start. But instead, she felt like she'd been handed a puzzle with half the pieces missing. And Clarence wasn't there to explain. Back inside, the bakery hummed with its usual rhythm, but Lila couldn't focus. Sarah caught her staring into space, a tray of biscuits cooling in her hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah said, nudging her. "That suit guy shake you up?" Lila managed a weak smile. "Something like that." She didn't mention the text, or the will, or the house. Not yet. She needed to see it for herself, to understand what Clarence had left behind and why it came with a shadow named Margaret. That night, she barely slept. The two notes, "This girl's worth more than gold, and she's not like them," sat on her bedside table, their creases worn from her touch. She traced Clarence's shaky scrawl, picturing his weathered hands scribbling in that notebook he always carried. What had he meant? Who was them? And what was Margaret hiding? By dawn, her decision was made. She couldn't walk away. Not from Clarence's trust, not from the chance to know him beyond the grumbles. She texted Edward Hayes. "I'm taking it. Send the papers." Then she grabbed her coat, her keys, and the courage she'd built serving biscuits through 5 years of gripes. The cottage was a 20-minute drive from Savannah, nestled on a quiet road where live oaks draped Spanish moss-like curtains. It was small, weathered but sturdy, with a sagging porch and a garden gone wild with weeds. Lila's heart thudded as she parked her beat-up sedan, the text flashing in her mind. "Don't come." She almost turned back, but Clarence's note, "Find it, you'll know," pulled her forward. She climbed the steps, paint peeling under her boots, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder, her breath fogging in the crisp air. The door creaked open, and there stood Margaret Dawson. She was maybe 60, wiry and tough-looking, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes like a hawk sizing up prey. Her flannel shirt hung loose over her jeans, and her arms crossed like a barricade. "You Lila?" she said, her voice sharp as a switchblade. Lila nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm here about Clarence's house." Margaret's gaze narrowed. "Ain't his house no more, is it? He gave it to you." The words dripped with something, resentment, maybe, or grief. Lila shifted, clutching her coat. "I didn't ask for it, ma'am. I just want to understand why he did." Margaret snorted, stepping aside. "Come in, then. But don't expect me to roll out no red carpet." The inside was dim and cluttered with old furniture. A sagging couch, a wooden table piled with newspapers, a fireplace cold and gray. It smelled of dust and coffee like Clarence had just left. Margaret didn't offer a seat, just stood by the kitchen doorway, watching Lila like she might steal the silverware. "I got a text," Lila said, breaking the silence. "Told me not to come. Said you know everything." "That you?" Margaret's face didn't flinch. "Nope. Don't have your number. Don't care to. Someone's messing with you, or scared of what you'll find." Her tone was flat, but her eyes flickered like she knew more than she'd let on. Lila's stomach twisted. "Find what?" "Clarence said there's something here for me." "What is it?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She turned, disappearing into the kitchen, and Lila followed, her boots thudding on the worn floor. The kitchen was tiny, a single bulb casting shadows over chipped counters. Margaret pulled a tin box from a shelf, rusted, dented, the kind you'd hide cookies in, and set it on the table with a clang. "He told me to give you this," she said. "Said you'd know what to do." Lila's pulse raced as she lifted the lid. Inside was a mess of papers, yellowed photos, a few crumpled bills, a silver key on a frayed string. She sifted through, her breath catching at a picture of a younger Clarence, smiling beside a woman and a little girl, all sunlit and happy. His family, she guessed, the ones Hayes said he'd lost. Underneath was a letter, folded tight, her name scrawled on it. She opened it, her hands trembling. "Lila, you're reading this, so you found the box. Good. I ain't one for mushy stuff, but you need to know why you're here. That money, that house, it's yours 'cause you didn't quit on me. 5 years of my nonsense and you kept showing up with that damn smile. My wife Ellie was like that, saw the good in folks, even a fool like me. Lost her and our girl 30 years back, been alone since 'cept for you. You gave me something to wake up for, even if I never said it. The keys to my old truck out back. Runs rough like me, but it's yours. Keep being you. That's all." Clarence Lila's throat tightened, tears blurring the ink. She saw it now. His grumbling wasn't just temper, it was armor, built from decades of loss. She'd been his lifeline, a flicker of the wife he'd loved, and he'd repaid her in the only way he knew how. The key dangled in her hand, cold and heavy, a final piece of him. Margaret's voice cut through, softer now. "He talked about you, last few months when the heart trouble got bad. Said you were different. Didn't judge him, didn't run. I stayed here 'cause he asked me to after I nursed him through the worst. Didn't expect him to give it all to some baker girl." She paused, her hawk eyes softening. "But I get it now. You earned it, fair and square." Lila wiped her face, the tin box glinting under the bulb. "I didn't do anything special," she said, voice thick. "Just poured coffee, baked biscuits." Margaret leaned against the counter, arms still crossed but looser. "That's the thing, ain't it? You think it's nothing, but to him, it was everything. He'd sit here nights, scribbling you in that notebook. Half the time about you. Girl with the smile, he called you. Said you reminded him life wasn't all bad." The words hit like a warm wave, washing away the guilt Lila'd carried since his last angry exit. She'd mattered, not to a rich man or a hero, but to a broken one who'd seen her light through his dark. "Why'd he hide it?" she asked. "Why not say it?" Margaret shrugged, a faint smirk tugging her lips. "Clarence? He'd sooner wrestle a gator than say something sweet. That's why he wrote it down. Notes, letters, all of it. Figured you'd find him someday." Lila clutched the key, the letter, the truth. The text still nagged. Margaret knows everything, but it didn't feel like a threat anymore. Maybe a neighbor, a friend, someone spooked by Clarence's choice. Margaret didn't seem the type to play games. "What about you?" Lila asked. "This house, I don't want to kick you out." Margaret waved a hand. "I got a sister in Charleston, been meaning to go. You take it, girl. He wanted you here, not me." She nodded at the box. "That's your highfalutin treasure. Trucks round back. Hope you like rust." Lila laughed, a shaky sound that broke the tension. "Guess I'll figure it out." She stood, the key biting into her palm. "Thanks, Margaret. For this, for him." Margaret just grunted, but her eyes held a flicker of warmth. "Don't thank me. Thank that stubborn old fool." Outside, Lila found the truck. A beat-up Chevy, more rust than paint, parked under an oak. She slid the key in, and it coughed to life, rattling like Clarence clearing his throat. She smiled through tears, imagining him behind the wheel, grumbling about gas prices. Back in the house, she packed the tin box, photos, letter, key, and drove home, the Chevy's rumble a quiet farewell. Days later, she sat with her mom on their patched-up couch, the $60,000 paying off debts and sketching plans for Lila's Haven, a bakery of her own. The cottage deed lay signed, a new start waiting. She kept Clarence's letter by her bed, a reminder that kindness didn't need a spotlight, it just needed to show up. The text never came again, its sender a ghost she'd never chase. Margaret moved to Charleston, leaving the cottage quiet but alive with Clarence's echo. One night, Lila drove the truck back to Sweet Haven, parking under the streetlights. She stepped inside, the bell jingling, and set a framed photo on the counter. Clarence, young and smiling, with his wife and daughter. "For you, Mr. Tate," she whispered, her voice steady. "Best part of my day, too." The bakery hummed on, and Lila smiled, carrying his legacy in every biscuit she baked. Some treasures weren't gold. They were the people who saw you and the ones you saw back.